All right, welcome everyone to Plan Stage Weekly, December 9th. It looks like the first point is Scott's demo, which it's kind of early for him. So I'm going to demo, unless someone else had something they wanted to chime in on one of the first two topics. No? Yep.
Since there's not a ton of stuff, would it make sense at some point, like just to talk through the current 13.8 planning issue together on this call, just to review it, or should we just keep that entirely async?
I think there would be value in going through that.
Okay,
in
I'll put it
this
down below.
Cool. All right. Share. All right. This issue, improving UX for adding related items. So this was a somewhat small UX tweak that I think will provide a lot of value, because I think I know I had been struggling with this, where you go to linked issues and try to add a related issue. And for this, you have to typically hit pound first, hashtag first, and then it'll autocomplete to some of the issue IDs. Now, with this change, and it is in production, it is on GitLab.com already, you just type in the number and it prepends the hashtag to the ID, and then you get autocomplete there. You can do that, and then you can do multiple ones, and it'll always add. You can still paste in the URL, and that will not prepend the hashtag there. And I'm not going to add it to this because it is in production, but it does work once you hit add.
Will you try to start typing and instead of adding the hash, to start typing like you want to match a word or phrase?
I don't think that works yet.
So this is where if you do the hashtag first and then you start typing, it will autocomplete in the title. So start typing whatever you want. And I bring this up. I was on a call yesterday where we spent 15 minutes talking about this with a customer who's confused about how to do this and was frustrated. So I think that's where they had no idea that you could even do this. And they also said, well, I was like, well, you can start with the issue title or the issue number. And like, we don't know what the issue number is. Like, we just want to type in the name of the thing and like have it autocomplete. Right. And so we technically already do that, but it's not like discoverable in any sort of way. And so I'm wondering where, like, if the right way to solve that is sort of saying, check the first character that gets entered. If it's a pound sign, then don't enter a pound sign. If it is not a pound sign, then enter the pound sign. And that way, like, people could still start typing and auto completing, because otherwise you're still going to have to remember to know to add the pound sign manually and then start typing. So I don't know if that makes sense or not, but
yeah, we just want to make the URL still work, because that's another important way of adding things. So I don't know how we'd handle that syntactically, but I love the idea.
Yeah, and I think for this first iteration, not sure why we kind of went the other way, where we were trying to essentially autocomplete on the number, so they weren't required to add the hashtag if they were searching for a issue number. But I think you're right, Gabe. For the majority of people, they're going to be searching by, or they're going to want to search by title as opposed to the issue number. No one really keeps track of issue numbers in their head unless they're coming from that issue. And if they're coming from that issue, they're probably going to copy and paste the URL.
Should I open up a follow-up? Yes, because that's what the folks basically said, is they absolutely did not want to ever have to copy and paste URLs anymore because it was a nightmare from a usability standpoint. And they just want to be able to type and like match things. Should I open up a follow-up issue to basically say like handle autocomplete well without having to type a pound sign, or how do we want to tackle that?
Yeah, that's what I would recommend, just as a follow-up issue to that first issue, doing that.
Say what? You broke up for a second, or maybe I did. I don't know.
Sorry. Yeah, I think that's what we should do. Just create a follow-up issue that we can tackle and we can take care of in a future iteration.
Okay, cool. I will do that.
All right. We got the next point.
Oh yeah, so I'm curious, as I've like part of the simplified groups and project working group, there's this whole idea of like we want to merge groups and projects together or like migrate them to namespaces or something so we don't have to duplicate code. I think Manage is gonna take the lead with a little bit of that, and then we're gonna help out kind of in terms of thinking through it. It's gonna be a joint effort between our two stages, because what's gonna basically happen is there's going to be this something called a workspace that gets created above all top level groups that is the same thing as a merge group and project, so that we can roll things up across top level groups for self-managed. Because that's the big disparity between self-managed and .com is on .com you already have a top level group and you only have one and everything rolls up there. Well, except for us, we have two at GitLab. And so like you don't run the same problem. We're on self-managed. You have like, 10 or 12 or 15 top level groups or even more. And you can't share data between the two or issues or epics or any of that stuff. And in sort of thinking about this a little bit more, there's a use case where, like we can roll everything up to this top level like workspace eventually to solve part of the problem. But then it's also more nuanced. Like how do we get something like an issue from gitlab.org GitLab project to link to an epic in gitlab.com group, which is a top level group. And in reading some of the history, like there's not a clear reason why we made a decision to disallow that. So I'm curious to get some feedback, because it's not just for issues in epics, but this also has practical implications for things like iterations, where if I wanted to create an iteration in one top level group or iteration cadence, and I then could create or associate issues from another top level group or child project there to my iteration, which is sort of like decouple, allow everybody to have their own groups with their own iteration cadences and still pull in issues from anywhere. And so I'm kind of curious to hear what the engineering constraints are there that we need to, or why we made that decision, and if it was really just a business rule or like a product rule instead of an engineering constraint.
Yeah, I cannot talk on the engineering part. I cannot talk on the decisions made when we decided to make it hierarchical groups and so on, because I was not there when it was all implemented. But like, I think we can link groups in between, just like we link issues. Just have some sort of a reference from one group to another, right? And then you look up permissions and so on. So that is not, I don't think it's a big problem. What I'm more concerned is I think the UX around that, because when you start cross-linking a lot of stuff in between each other, then that can get very complicated very fast. And yeah, like as with everything, the more stuff you link in between, the more you have to check permissions and everything else. And then obviously that can have an impact on performance. If you have cross-linked like thousands or hundreds of thousands of groups or objects, right? Then you kind of have a problem there as well. So I'm not sure, like I understand the need of to have to be able to link one specific issue from one specific group somewhere in one specific hierarchy to some other hierarchy. Like I understand that is like something that can happen. I'm not sure how big of a use case that is to have this type of granularity. And I think we discussed some time ago, like I'd be inclined more to think about sharing the whole feature, like sharing issues from one specific group to a different sibling specific group. That would seem to me somewhat not easier because the amount of work is probably there, but perhaps on performance side it'll be something like easier to grasp, I guess.
Yeah, I think if you were to like share all the issues from one project to another group, for example, you could still do something like if those were shared, you technically have access, but you could also, so there's not a ton of noise, you could basically say like, I'm only going to show, like if you were to have an issue that gets assigned to a group that already has access to it, then you could limit visibility just to things that like are assigned to that specific group. So without like having to check access for each specific issue, it's sort of like a access and visibility are two separate things, if that makes sense.
And then combine that with iterations and planning. I'm not sure how a shared item or a shared issue would behave in terms of planning and so on in a different hierarchy where you have different iterations and different cadences and stuff like that. So how do you combine the two? Do you allow for multiple iterations then to be set on the same issue? Do you import all of the iterations then as well to be able to see that issue on some boards? So like it seems simple, but when you deep dive into these small details, it does get complicated fast.
Yeah, I know it does. I think you also mentioned earlier, like what are the use cases, and I'll be frank and say that some of our customers that we've talked to who are self-managed will not adopt plan until we fix this problem. Because you can't, and it was another customer, the same customer I was talking to yesterday, which is even a little bit smaller. The engineer was on the call and he's like, yeah, we organized all of our groups and projects around how we wanted to structure our code. And it has nothing to do with how the product managers want to structure their roadmaps, right? And so they're forced into either we're going to optimize the way we structure groups and projects for our code, or we're going to optimize it for the way that we structure our roll-up reporting, and it's never both. And right now, like they're doing the workspaces in self-managed will solve part of that because you can roll everything up to the top level workspace across all of your different groups and projects and whatever. So you can have the same sort of experience that you have on GitLab.com, but you also run into the problem where you have smaller teams who just can't share things across sibling groups, right? And so like I don't know the best way to solve this. Sid kind of shut down the idea of doing a DAG, but like I'm still stuck trying to figure out how we solve for like our customers and unblocking their constraints so that they can adopt plan. And I think this is like a big one that I would like us to spend some time as a stage thinking about.
Is it possible in Jira to cross-link? Or they don't have the hierarchy, right?
You can't cross-link. No, I don't think so. You can roll things up into a portfolio, and the way that they've done it with Jira Align now is Jira Align is a completely separate product, and so there you can basically specify I want to pull in issues from this project, and this project, and like it doesn't matter because it's just using an API to basically pull all those things in, and it doesn't really respect hierarchy. So you basically are giving the product managers the ability to build whatever reporting structure they want on top of the existing hierarchy of groups and projects or whatever they have.
And then on top of this as well, if the more we move into custom issue types and having two separate hierarchies, this hierarchy defines their issue types in one way, and then they want to share it with a hierarchy that has totally different issue types. So how do you combine those? How do you show that new issue type in the list of totally different issue types and so on? So like I don't have an answer.
Yeah. One of the things I was thinking about too that might help is thinking about, instead of making all that like crazy flexible, just making it so that you can better associate issues to merge requests in sibling groups and projects. So like right now, sort of the problem is that when you go into an issue, there's a button to create a merge request. It looks directly at your repo and that's it. It does the automatic creation there. Like the workflows and everything within a project are optimized to assume, with the assumption that issues live in the same places the repo lives. And so if we figure out how to decouple that one assumption, you could have a hierarchy or a structure that is just all of your road mapping and product planning, and also make it easy for engineers and whoever to basically link a specific project or group to one or more repositories. So that way, when you go to like create your merge request from an issue, like you would pick from a couple different of the connected repositories. Like you could tackle it that way as well. So instead of like making issues super flexible, making or decoupling merge requests from issues, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but it makes sense, but it is a slightly different thing now that you're talking about the coupling between merge requests and issues versus doing the planning work across multiple across different groups, so to say, right? It does relate to the merge request, but it's sort of different as well, because like the management does not look too much into merge requests. To my understanding, they would rather want to do these cross groups kind of planning of the issues and not bother with the merge requests at all. And then as a developer, being able to see the issues within the merge request across all of the groups, that's very easy and very handy for the engineering and development team. So there is a kind of two different use cases, which both are stumbled upon the same problem, the same issue of being able to cross-reference across groups, but it's slightly different.
Yeah. I think, sorry, who wants to go next? Or Jan, you were going to say something, I think.
Yeah, my guess why epics are limited to single group is that to limit the scope of epics we work with, because groups represents an organizational unit. I can imagine how it would work if we would allow cross-referencing of resources across groups, because there, from user point of view, what would be a reason for building a structure of nested groups in such case if I can use resources from completely different or unrelated groups anyway. So it would basically break the rule of having a structured nested groups, I guess. But another reason why I think I can imagine this could be easy to do is we would have to do all the searching and reference checks and permission checks across all groups or all related groups. And the permission checking already is difficult, because if you check issue in one group or project, you have to check also permissions in all ancestor projects. So we would have to do it for unlimited amount of associated issues. So it would be quite a big complication or something to be aware of when we implement this.
We already do this for issues where you can relate an issue from any group, any project to any project, regardless of hierarchy, right?
Well, you mean cross-referencing. We can cross-reference issues from other groups, but that's something else than doing this when in all the finders or when listing issues and when checking permissions for each of them.
How do we move forward trying to solve this though? Because it's sort of like one of those like crossroads where if we don't solve it one way or another within the context of a group or a project, or even creating like this other thing that people outside of groups and projects that people can be assigned to, basically, that then you can assign issues to from any group or a roadmap or some. If we don't figure out how to solve it, like I don't know how we're going to scale effectively.
But we do, yeah, we already use this. I'm not sure how extensively it is used, but we are already able to share groups within a project, right? And then we do check permissions there as well, because that group is shared. So
Right.
I don't think that adds too much to the plate in terms if you can already share groups with groups, especially if we think about unifying groups and projects into sort of a single object, so to say.
Yeah, I was thinking about something similar, that we could use this share group approach, and we could allow including a group in another group, and that would perhaps make things easier.
Well, it will not be easy because you'll have to now check two hierarchies
Well,
the permissions, but
yeah, but you have a
have
limited
a
scope.
working model already in a way. I'm not sure if it's totally doing the same thing that we want. I mean, I'm not sure if it's checking permissions through the hierarchy and all that stuff, but we sort of have something like that.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I mean, the major benefit is that then you have a limited number of groups which you work with, instead of just allowing referencing anything from anywhere, if you know what I mean.
We can move on because as I saw a lot of other stuff get out of the agenda, but I wanted to raise that just so we're thinking about it as a problem to solve, like the long-term big picture problem to solve that we sort of like it can't not solve if we want to be successful. So I think I'll ping some of the engineers, Jan. I think I already pinged you and Alexander. I pinged you on an issue where we're collaborating with Mage on merging the two things. So I'll include y'all and stuff, and we can keep figuring out how to think about solving the problem. So, Kristen, I think you had the next item.
Oh yeah, so this one's also an FYI. My team, Tom, just merged an update, which is in the comment here, on our design management usage ping for the Gmail. So since designs have moved over to product planning, I just want the team here to look at that and make sure that it's okay. Tom is a front-end engineer. I'm not for sure that backend has looked at it yet. We do want all of designs being viewed, edited, or created deduped into monthly active users on the chart. The existing chart that's there that I linked only has views currently. So we need engineering's eyes on it, and then I'll need data's eyes to make sure that the chart pulls the right thing.
It's also worth adding, we added some trackers for not views, but added a few trackers for design management things. So I will pull up the MRs for that too and kind of show you. But it was part of the work we did for issue tracking and tracking all the interactions on an issue.
Oh, nice. That makes sense. Yeah, we should probably have I'll move the knowledge dashboards over so we have them under plan too, just so we start looking at it there. There's a really huge uplift and spike, which I don't believe. It went up to like 80,000 in a month, which doesn't make any sense. So I don't trust their math on that chart that I linked there. Okay, John, it looks like you've got.
Yeah, the comments here as well. I wondered, did you want to talk to the priority of that Epic user events issue as well? Like, which are we looking to do both of these within a certain period of time, or do you have them both in mind for 13.8, or you want to spread them out? Like, what's the urgency?
Issue counts, are these ones, do you mean Epic? The Epic ones we were talking about?
Yeah, so these are these counts that I worked on yesterday. So I'm just kind of wondering, like,
I think that the sooner, like design management is like second priority kind of right now. So we do have our main Gmail. So they are competing priorities. If it's one release on the issue counts and then one on design management, that works if we do the issue counts first, from my perspective.
Okay, cool, thanks. Yeah, okay, I have the next item. So yeah, there's an opportunity here to get a really quite straightforward performance win across multiple pages. Yeah, so let me just ask quickly, like, does anyone have a strong opinion for or against counts in the sidebar being truncated and rounded? At the minute, for example, we have a bug where if you look at the number of issues in GitLab org, on the sidebar it says something like, let's say 45,990 something. And then if you look in the issue list, it's like 49,908 or something, right? So like there's a tiny discrepancy anyway. This count in the sidebar is costing us sometimes north of 350 milliseconds on the initial page load, which means 350 milliseconds off the bottom line, right? Because we don't load anything on the page until we've loaded the initial page load. So taking that away would save us like 350 milliseconds. And it's quite an easy win. The downside, if you can call it a downside, is that we'd have to round some numbers because we can't guarantee at any given time the numbers are exactly accurate in the sidebar. So if you feel strongly that we shouldn't do that, I'd like to hear your opinion now. Otherwise, like, why shouldn't we do this if there are any other reasons?
Yeah, so I think it's a good idea. My question was, at what point do we round it? And then you answered it around the cache. So does that mean that we would only have it behind a cache after 1,000, or would it still be? Could there be a chance if it's, I don't know, like 20, that it could be different than the other count? Like the other count could be 22.
Yeah, so the way the code would work would be that it would check the cache anyway every time, like because it doesn't know in the code path like that there's only 20 issues in this group that you're looking at. Like it checks the cache first for an entry, and if it doesn't find anything, it goes to the database. So we'll check it anyway. So there's no reason not to cache it anyway. As regards to the rounding, we'll cache the exact number, but because the cache will go stale at some point, possibly during the time period like over which will expire the key, we can't guarantee that it'll be the exact count the user will see. So rounding it solves that problem. We also have to like think about certain events which might cause us to bust the cache. So large imports, bulk operations like deletions and so on. But for most operations in a group, really like we should be able to set it for like a day, you know, and then it's set. So only the first visitor will warm the cache. We won't do any pre-warming of the cache. We'll just let the first visitor experience the current load time of whatever it is. And then every visitor thereafter to that group, it'll just be drawn from the cache. It's such an easy win, and it gets us so much in return. And then if anyone does really care about the exact number of issues they have, they can still go to the issue lists.
That was my follow-up. Is there anywhere else where that would happen? Everywhere else it would be completely accurate. It's just sidebars.
Just the group sidebar, in fact.
Group sidebar.
Yeah,
okay.
The issues sidebar like
Okay.
would be a candidate for this as well. Like the project sidebar, I believe, which draws another count. It draws the count of issues in the project, not in the group.
Mm-hmm.
But the group sidebar joins all the projects onto that group, grabs the issues, and that query is, and then checks permissions for the user. So that query is quite slow, especially on larger projects. So yeah, they could go to the issue list. Although I would question, like, to take something like the GitLab project, when it gets to 35,000 issues, does anyone really care? Like, does anyone really care that there's 5 more issues? Like, probably not. Like, so we could even cache it on the issues list as well.
Could even add a plus or a tilde if people are upset, like approximate at some point.
Yeah, I see no reason to display this on like the issue list either. When you're over like 50, does it really matter? It's like to-dos. By the time your to-dos hit 99 plus, you're really keeping track.
I only have 99 plus.
Right. I mean, basically people just live that way. When you hit 35,000 issues, and another 50 or 100 or 300 issues is negligible in your project scope. So
I think you may want the counts when you do filtering though on the issue list, because then you're looking into something that more specific.
Yeah.
So even if it's 1,000 plus, you want to know how many of these issues do you have there that are specific to this label or something like that.
That's
But when
smart,
you look at
yeah.
total counts, I think you don't really care. But yeah.
No, I agree with that. I think the sidebar, it's irrelevant for me, at least, on the way I use GitLab. I think when you're filtering, it makes sense. But even filtering, I would argue that we could do something like 500 plus, or just come back and say, yeah, you got 500 plus issues. Because again, the purpose of most filtering is to be like, hey, either I'm trying to get down to see a specific set of issues, in which case I'm looking for 20 to 30 that meet my criteria, or I'm trying to get a rough estimate of how much work is there. And at that point, 500 issues plus is, well, there's a lot of work there. I mean, like that's 500, 600, it's still a lot of work. So I think that makes a lot of sense though for filtering.
I don't mind removing it entirely. Like I don't, at least from the sidebar. The other thing that I've been thinking about a little bit more just in situations like this is like, I've noticed, and I think Jake, you brought it up, like a lot of times we've made sort of these engineering decisions based on the idea that we need to hide certain things due to authorizations, or if there's a confidential issue in a project, then we shouldn't disclose that even exists anywhere. And we've sort of already breached that ground where we're showing weight from confidential issues rolling up into epics and onto like burn down and burn up charts on milestones and iterations. Like that's not a security risk to say that there's something exists because you're not disclosing any information about it. And so like, I wonder if there's an opportunity to like switch towards using things like Postgres events and event listeners to keep tables across groups and projects updated when new events or when new issues or whatever do change. So that way we're not like having to query it every single time, and it would always be updated correctly on the table whenever we requested a page. That's the other thing, if we wanted to keep it and have it be more performant, taking an approach like that. But just two thoughts. But I think if we want to experiment with getting rid of it, just we did this with the add issue side or button on a board. We just put it behind a feature flag in the UI and disabled it. And we're waiting to see if anybody complains. If nobody complains, then we're just going to like delete the code. So we could do the same thing with this.
Are we talking now about completely removing it from the sidebar or from the issue list?
The sidebar.
Okay. Yeah, so just a couple things, and I'll speak up for UX because I think they're both out of office. There were issues with the sidebar count for test cases. And not to say that it's a bad idea to remove it from the sidebar for issue count, but it just kind of signals that people do use that count. And then the thing I also worry about is for non-GitLab projects, like we're kind of looking at it at the, what do we have, 35,000 issue count, where that count has no value. For smaller projects, for smaller organizations, there may be some value to that sidebar number. So all I'm saying is we should talk to UX and UX research before we remove anything there.
Yeah, I think there's definitely like when you have 10 issues, if you're running a small like open source project and you have 10 issues, it's like, okay, I have 10 things to do. That's like a very valuable like signal. That said, the performance impact of the counts isn't bad at that scale either. So they're like fine to keep, like they're not costing anything. So having it on a like a group level feature flag that we could have counts off for GitLab org and have them on for, you know, some small open source project or whatever. But I also am in favor of doing like the non-granular estimates, because I think that kind of get the best of both worlds, where we have at least some signal there of like how many issues there are, but it's super fast.
Yeah, I mean, you could also take the approach of saying, hey, if it's under like, I don't know, 500, be accurate, because that way the query would be more performant to those numbers anyway. And then above that, just say 500 plus in the bar and leave it there. I don't know what people would feel about that, and I agree that user research maybe need to be involved a little bit. But I think when you're talking about smaller organizations, yeah, that might be very valuable. But even for them, when you hit the number of like 500, you're going to be filtering for your issues anyway. Nobody's going to go and look at 500 issues straight up. They're going to have a board or a filtered list or something to figure out what's going on. to your point about like a small project with 10, 12, 13 issues, you're going to just view it as a list and probably never filter because you can see everything on one page. So what's the point of filtering? But we kind of hit a point of no return. When you hit 500, 1,000, I don't know, pick a number. Does it really matter? You're not going to look at them all at once.
Gabe mentioned storing the count on the table itself, just for the sake of completeness. There is a feature in Rails called counter cache, which, as long as you do everything the Rails way, will automatically update the count on the parent object. So in this case, anytime anyone interacts with an issue that has a group ID, it would, increment or decrement the counter on the group automatically. And there's no reason why you can't have a second counter cache, which is confidential counter cache, and then it's just a case of summing the two or leaving out the confidential one if the user can't access it. But it's just that that's a bigger job, and it also means we have to go through all our services, all our the ways that we can create and import issues and make sure that they're compliant with the Rails way of doing things, which, like, spoiler alert, they won't be. So it's a bigger job, whereas this is like kind of an easy win, and if we're cool with it, if we're cool with this rounding of the numbers, then it's something we could do in a milestone. We could even slip it into 13.8 and have a win in time for our LCP OKR.
I guess the using caching, outside of database might be a simpler or better solution, because if we keep counters for each table or project, we would still have to go through the structure of the group, and we wouldn't get rid of the relatively expensive query to get all the descendants of the group. So. We wouldn't get rid of the major issue with caching, which is invalidation of the cache. So I guess that if we can get rid of it, it's better to use caching in Redis, which is time limited or something like that.
All right. Are we okay to move on to the next one? I'm going to share my screen for this. And what I want to do here is I know this is just product planning. I know this is my own view. I don't want to mess up flows that are already happening on the team. But I want to show potentially a more consistent way to visualize the whole of the release and just see where things are at. So I'm going widescreen and sharing my screen here because it does take up a fair amount of real estate. And I do have a GitLab Better Boards plugin installed, which is these lines across the top, which are filters. So I am cheating the system a little bit with this. I extensively use those, plus I create filters in my to-dos like this 13.8, which scopes the board down to front end, back end direction. So what I've got here is basically everything on our plate under product planning in one board. What I'm noticing is as we look at like 13.7, so if I just scope down to that label, we have a lot of uncategorized issues that sit in the left-hand open column. And then there is still a lot that's in like design, solution validation, planning breakdown, which to our customers is going to look like something shipping. And I know Jeremy was mentioning this as well. In the past, what I've done on other teams is only really use the milestones for things that we're going to ship. Anything that EMs and the engineers commit to that is in ready for development would have the label on it. And then when we're rolling, when we're in the release and building in the build track, it would really only be these last columns that we're looking at. And everything else gets their milestone label removed or gets punted. Like for a lot of these, they would punt over to 13.8 or 13.9 immediately, just so I clean out the junk drawer. We also, when I look at this scope or grouped by epic, I was able to see, if we just let this spin for a sec, that there are a lot of these issues down below, which is just like a flag to me that are not in epics, way down. issues with no epic assigned. Some of these may have been created by engineers on the fly, added in extra weights. Getting a process around this where if a new issue is created, we have a discussion, we move it quickly to the next release, or we bring it on the board immediately and it goes into ready for development or the blocked column, and we know that we just added like 2 points to that capacity. So these are just different things that I'm looking at and just the health of the overall release.
Yeah, you might need to just do some, since you're kind of taking over, do some house cleaning. I had to do this for a couple of releases in a row where I basically had to move everything out. And so like I got to the point now where thanks to like Donald and Jake and a lot of the engineers and UX folks contributing to clean stuff up, we're at a point where it's this sort of like what you're talking about, where we don't put milestones on anything until it gets into planning breakdown. I even deleted the scheduling list because it's just one more queue that,
yeah,
I mean, is annoying to a certain degree.
that was a question too.
Yeah, so like I don't use that because I found stuff just would end up sitting there, and I basically just we've gotten good over practicing a little bit, but I think that's where I would just push everything out and do a one-time cleanup.
Yeah. So as we're in flight, we have like a.
Sorry, I was in the process of doing that and just never got it done. It's halfway there basically. So yeah.
A lot of this in 13.7, I think, like the thing I'm not sure about though is just we don't have for like community contributions for engineer added items, we don't have a flow yet of what happens to them. So like we'll just have to talk about that more. But ideally, I would like to have everything designed, all these cleared out. So when we're done the release, it's over. The other thing I filter too is direction items on the board. So if this is 13.7 plus direction, and just looking at this, we need, so it's this one, maybe this is a community contribution, which is direction. Maybe that one we could remove it from. And then it looks like we've got in flight 6 release posts that need to be done in the next 2 days. But I don't know yet if these are shipping. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These 3 are still in dev. That's a conversation that we'll have to have, I guess, in the last week of this release, week or 2. But I'm going to start doing the release posts on all of them. Just wanted to mention that.
The other thing to note is I'm reluctant to take the direction off that community contribution because that is a direction item that we just can't get to. If he does that work, that is something we'll want to put in the release post.
Yeah. And I'm wondering too, like if this should be on the board because then the other engineers are more aware of it too. It's in dev, but we can have that discussion. It does seem odd that it's always kind of off. We would, in knowledge, we would pair with an engineer would kind of oversee or at least be on the community contribution, and it would be on the board like everything else. So it was integrated with the team.
Yeah, I asked this exact question during the week actually, because we've had an uptick in community contributions on the back end, and just mostly Lee, but a couple of other people as well. We have on the billboard a separate queue for community contributions, and they all go in there. The simple reason that we can't, in the way that we can with our own internal team members, like we can't guarantee a schedule when we have contribution from a community contributor.
Exactly.
So we can't say that it's going to, you know, make it in this milestone or that it's in dev, but we would expect, you know, a week turnaround or so. So and we don't.
What happens when it's in dev? That's my question, because my team would just put it in dev with the community contribution, but they wouldn't put deliverable. So the
downside to that is what we found is then you'll get those missed things on there. Missed 30, and that really discourages community contribution because they feel like they get dinged. They somehow feel like those are negative because we have these bright red missed labels. So I'll
manage that tightly though. I won't let those happen. I'll punt them. We'll have the discussion. I'll punt them to the next release before they get them. And if they do get them, I would remove them on the community contributions. I understand though, like, like the red tape on what they're working on doesn't make any sense.
But I think what we're saying then, if it's a community contribution, it probably shouldn't have a milestone attached to it, because there's no way we can commit to getting something done in a milestone when we have no real like control over how much time they're going to put into it, how much work they're going to put into it. Like John said, I think what we have been doing is on the build board, we just have a separate label and essentially treat it like its own workflow label. And that's where we keep track of community contributions and how we need to guide them or help them through those.
Yeah. I think though that our customers are going to see it like it. Yeah, that's true. We can't necessarily promise it, but they would still be tracking it the way the other ones are. And for me too.
I find actually sometimes contributors add labels or milestones themselves, and yeah, like it's hard to make the argument that, like, if they're volunteering their time and they want to track it a particular way, I always feel bad telling them or removing a label when they've added it, or removing a milestone when they've added it, especially if they do feel like they can get it done in that time.
Yeah, he added the milestone to that. I did not touch. That's not something I added. I don't believe.
Oh, it might have been me as well. Okay. I'm not sure, because that's a whole stream of work. Adding multiple participants to service desk issues has about 4 or 5 different issues involved in it, and he's assigned to all of them. So he's actually delivering that entire stream of work himself. So yeah, it could have been him on some issues and myself on the others. I probably just wanted to keep them consistent, to be honest, rather than have some in a workflow state, some not, some in the milestones, some not.
To be clear, when he does land these in 13.7 or whenever, I'm going to nominate him for the MVP, because he really is doing an entire stream of work for us, which is fantastic. And John and I have talked to him. He's a really good guy. He really wants to help out. So that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
his
I think
progress across them though is not visible. Like, you all are telling me how great and he's doing all these, but to me it just looks like he's not working on it. It's because it's not in dev, or none of these are in review, or so just that's.
I believe there were some MRs from Lee recently related to service desk participants.
Also, to clarify the flip side, if he doesn't do them, we're not touching them.
Right.
We're never going to do them in the next 6 months.
Keep punting them along.
No, right. We would just take them right off and backlog them. Right now, Service Desk is completely on hold for us as long as it's not a bug fix. So the only life being breathed into Service Desk right now is Lee, which is why I'm even more reluctant to discourage that, because, if it's not a bug or it's not impacting people, we're not really pushing.
Sure. Okay, we can talk about this more later. I understand what's going on now with it. I think we're at time. I wanted to go through planning breakdown, but I don't want to go over time here. I've got a list here. This can be read only. This is a comment from Alexis supporting the SUS initiative. So we have this push within product where we're all signing up to do specific fixes to try to fix the SUS survey. So these are the suggestions from her. Feel free to also comment on this, or if you know of one that would help move that UX score. And then this is an open question that can go async. We're discussing settings of like the filter on the swim lanes, and whether or not it would be a user setting or a board setting or global. So I was just more asking, is there a chart somewhere, a table, something architecture wise, where maybe we're logging every type of setting around boards and issues and roadmaps, and which ones are persistent, which ones are users, which ones are board settings, so we can just sort of get clear on that and see the big picture so we make consistent decisions.
You mean regarding boards or in general?
Boards first, but in general to issues, to everywhere else, I think if we are consistent in how we apply the settings or the user cache or however we do it, I think it would make sense. to have something like an
that's
architecture document that's a step higher?
That's a good question. I don't think we are super consistent in this. I know we have a couple of boards related user preferences, both boards preferences and board user preferences tables, where we store server-side user data or settings per board. But I know there are also some use cases when we use client-side caching. So to be honest, I don't think we are consistent in this, and I'm not aware any generic suggestion or model.
Maybe I'll pull them into an issue description with a table, and everyone can contribute what they know into that, and we could just see how consistent or not consistent it is.
Yeah,
Start it.
Yeah, we can start with this. I can create an issue for it.
Okay.
Yeah, boards are a little bit different. Like I think the only thing we cache on the user side, and when I say user, it's not really, actually there is. So I think we do have user settings and then we have local storage. I was going to say the only thing we store in local storage, so that would essentially be browser state, is the labels hiding and showing. Everything else is stored on the back end.
What about minimizing columns on the board? Does everyone, if I do that on mine, does everyone see it? Or is it just for me?
Just you.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So
So we
that
need
may
a
be
chart.
another local storage also. Yeah. Okay. Your idea.
That one is. I think that's also persisted to the database. That one. It's not just local storage. I believe. Could be wrong, but.
We need some source of truth on that. I don't know if it would be like an engineering document in the documentation section settings, but I need I need something to reference too from a UX standpoint. Okay, that's it for me.
We're at time, so check out the planning issue, contribute to it, collaborate. Would love input, things that at least for my group that I haven't listed that we should consider. And I also wanted to ask everyone to help weighing some of those issues that haven't been weighted yet. We're breaking them down just because I'm going to try really hard not to put too much weight into this milestone. And I'd like to do like 80% of what our velocity has been, or maybe even 70%. So I just need to know what things I have to kick out from a prioritization standpoint if we need to make that decision. Or if there's like other things that we should do before some of the things I listed, raise that stuff just so we can all stay on the same page. But I'd like to get this figured out by the early next week so that we can get the planning issue cleaned up before we do the kickoff video. I'm trying to follow the release timeline a little bit more structured way so it doesn't feel like a rush. So I'd love y'all's help with that. That's it.
Cool. Thanks all.
Everyone,
Have a
have a
good
great
rest
day.
of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.